a war that I feel many of the black women adopted later. The white women stepped out of the way and basically used the black woman as their weapon, as their puppets, and maintained the war between the black man and the black woman, while them and their white men continue to stand together. Greetings and welcome to Caribbean Vanguard. Today I'm going to talk about this subject called feminism. The feminist movement is a series of political campaigns for reforming the conditions that affects women's quality of life. In 1848, there was a convention. It was called the Seneca Convention, put together by a lady. Her name is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton was married to Henry Stanton. She was always someone who was incensed or upset with the gender iniquities. Her father was an alcoholic, so she witnessed something, right? Maybe he used to put his hand on her mom or whatever she saw. I don't know, but that's what I've read about the alcohol situation. Also found that she was an anti-slavery activist, and I tried to look for examples of that. I did not find any real examples other than the fact that she was an opportunist. She saw that there was an opportunity for her to use the momentum in order to push for the woman's right, the feminist movement that she was an advocate for, and she took the opportunity. Right? So she was an advocate of women's rights, and she helped to lead the first wave of feminism. So this is what I found when I looked for examples of her supporting the anti-slavery activists. In her early speech and letters advocating women's suffrage, Stanton would sometimes relate the position of slaves to that of women. And when she said woman, of course she's talking about white women, because black man and black woman were slaves together, right? At times, the comparison was unfavorable, attempting to show that women were more deserving of enfranchisement. At other times, she presented women and slaves in equal positions, equally deserving of political voice. Again, she's whenever it works for, just like many of these politicians today, both Republicans and Democrat, but mostly Democrat, right, where they use the black people to their advantage. When the Civil War began, Stanton suspended her campaign for women's suffrage and gave her support to the emancipation of slaves. Again, she was aligned with what the white man thought at the time. Okay, remember, when they talk about this not treated like humans and are not being on the same level with the white man, women were not drafted or forced into war. It was men fighting the war at the time. Black men and white men were the one out there fighting the war, and the other peoples that was involved. They were the ones fighting the war. They were the ones losing their life in the front line. Okay, so naturally, I would see why some people will push harder for the black men to get that voting privilege, because black men gonna fight for that. They're gonna say, hey, look, I'm out there fighting this war with you. I need to be able to vote, and then and so forth. But the white woman felt that she was still more deserving than the black man. Now, you got to put things in context to remember that most people back then followed Christian philosophy. They believed that war was a thing for men, right? And they protect the woman and the children. So in most cases, I don't believe that these women were treated badly. There were some who were treated badly, of course, but I believe that was escalated. I believe most men treated their woman well. Of course, these women were their sisters, mothers, daughters. So why would they treat them bad? In most cases, they were the ones who had some issue with alcohol, which many did. But the woman and man fight had nothing to do with black people. It was between the white man and the white woman. This was something initiated by a white woman because she felt that she was being oppressed by the white man. right? Also keep in mind that these women who kicked off this cynical fall convention, they were married to white men. Many were Quakers, many were politicians and stuff like that. So that is why the feminist movement was a major political tool as well. Even after the 13th Amendment freed the slaves, many believed that slaves would not truly be freed until they were politically enfranchised. Thus began the movement for an amendment that would establish their legal status. Stanton believed that by aligning the women's cause with this movement, women's suffrage would be achieved sooner. Isn't this the same thing the LGBTQ did on all them? And what happened was, black people, when they see white women or white people coming to them saying, hey, we want to work with you, right, to help your movement and help our movement, right? Naturally, many of them open their arms, open their doors, and then the movement that they accepted end up taking front stage, and that movement end up getting what they want. And then whatever black people wanted that African people wanted, they never accomplish it, right? They may gain some little grounds, but it's always in a direction that gives more power to the other movements and the people that oppressed them in the first place. So that's what happened. And another sad thing is this, that far too many times the African people who were involved or were trying to accomplish certain things, they would drop whatever they had going on in order to support someone else's cause and make that person's cause front stage of their agenda as well. Stanton opposed the ratification of the 14th Amendment if it only applied to men. Stanton made several claims that no class of citizen should be underprivileged, that black men would be as hesitant as white men to extend the vote to women, that women who were educated and white were more deserving of the vote than former slaves, that women would better ensure the safety of this nation, and that women needed to protect themselves from the brutality of the black men. Here what Stanton is doing is trying to play the fear tactic game, because she know that the white men dreaded that the black man have access to the woman or to like treat their woman in certain way. So she used that to try to get what she want. Stanton's racist position may have resulted from the abolitionist betrayal and the abandonment of Stanton's cause. Because the abolitionists would not help her pursue women's suffrage, Stanton found it necessary to compete with them by denigrating black men and asserting that white women were more worthy of suffrage. Because the abolitionists would not help her pursue women's suffrage, Stanton found it necessary to compete with them by denigrating black men and asserting that white women were more worthy of suffrage. So this basically, she kicked off a war between herself and the black men, which is a war that I feel many of the black women adopted later. The white women stepped out of the way and basically used the black woman as their weapon, as their puppets, and maintained the war between the black man and the black woman, while them and their white men continued to stand together. And unfortunately for Stanton, these tactics did not convince the abolitionists that the woman's cause was justified at the time. Bad timing. Instead, it distanced her further from those who might have supported her. She might have had a better chance of obtaining suffrage for women if she had used language that was less antagonistic. So here it's basically saying it's not her message to say, it was her approach and possibly her timing, especially with all that was going on. Another lady who worked hand in hand with Stanton to kick off the conference is a lady by the name of Lucretia Mott. This is an image of her here. She was married to a Quaker. His name was James Mott. Lucretia Mott was a Quaker and an abolitionist. She was a women's rights activist, social reformer, and she was at a convention in Europe one time where 500 people attended it, and she got a chance to speak, but first she was barred because of her gender. Again, and the people who barred her was white men, not black men, right? So this war was always between the white man and the white woman. And she was barred, but eventually was able to speak, and she talked about not supporting stores or businesses that made clothes from slave labor. And she had her own attire. I guess she created her own clothes and stuff like that. So she was in a position where she can do that. But I would say for the poorer white women or white people, they probably didn't have the ability, had the skills to make their own clothes, So again, I believe with her and Stanton being such close compadres, I think it hard to not believe that she also, or her views also align with Stanton. The abolitionist idea was really something that they thought was beneficial and would help them in what they want. So make it seem like they are just people who are just good and want everyone to be living justfully. But they really had an agenda, and that agenda was to be equal with the white man. Other woman involved with putting this together was a lady named Martha Wright. She was married to a guy named Peter Wright. Also, you had Jane Hunt. She was married to Richard Hunt. Mary McClintock was married to Thomas McClintock. And then you had Alita Pottinger. So again, all these women, most of them was basically married to white men, politicians, Quakers, and different stuff like that. So they did not step out of line. Their ideas, their view seemed to have been aligned with the man they were married to. At that convention, they talk about social, civil, religious conditions and the rights of women. Right? Elizabeth Cady, who you can see in the picture here, and she wrote in the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments that all men and women are created equal, and resolved that women would take action to claim the rights of citizenship denied to them by men. Again, what men denied them the citizenship? Was it a white man? Was it the Mexican man? Was it a black man? Frederick Douglass was a speaker at the convention, and he was one who signed the Declaration of Sentiments. Frederick Douglass, for those who don't know who he is, was once a slave. He got freed. He was with a black woman at one point. He later married a white woman. So he was someone who aligned with Miss Stanton and Susan B. when it comes to this whole feminist thing. He supported the two, the abolition of slavery and also the feminist movement. But in 1869, he publicly disagreed with Elizabeth Stanton and Susan Anthony. So you can imagine, I can imagine the conversation these women, along with their husband, were probably having in private about this black man, Frederick Douglass, who denied them or disagreed with their idea that women simultaneously would have the right to vote along with black men. Frederick Douglass was heavily involved in both projects, like I say, and he believed that it was essential for both groups to be working together, and I think that this was a bad idea, as mentioned earlier, because this diluted or decreased the potency, right, or the strength of whatever the black people had going on. Whatever black people had going, it pulled energy from them, because now you have these women, black women, who are more aligning with the white woman. For one, some of them like the idea of being accepted by a group of women who denied them all their life, right? So, I can see how that would affect the movement. All right, I'm feeling this sense of sisterhood, a false sense of sisterhood that really never existed. Frederick Douglass was a respected orator. He was a famous writer. He was an abolitionist, a civil rights leader, and he was a consultant for the president. So he was basically the mediator between the black community and the president. He basically gave the president an update on the community, right? so that he can better manage the country, I guess. I want to reiterate before I continue that no black women were invited. I don't remember if I mentioned it earlier. No black women were invited to the Seneca Convention. The only black person who was there was Frederick Douglass, and he was married to a white woman. To continue, the 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870, which allowed black men to vote, and this did not sit good with the suffragist movement. They came out after that happened. They felt that it should have included women and guarantee them the right to vote irrespective of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So this was another clever strategy here, because before that, there were no mention, if someone have that, give it to me. There were no mention of this regardless of servitude or regardless of race when they talk about women. This lady here, her name is Suffragette Susan B. Anthony, famous for saying, quote, "I will cut off this right arm of mine before I will ever work or demand a ballot for a Negro and not a woman." She's talking about white women. On 18 August 1920, the 19th Amendment was granted, and it gave women the right to vote. It was passed by Congress on June 4, 1919. Another major figure in the first wave was a lady named Margaret Sanger. I've heard so much about her. I've heard about the famous speech about her calling black people a human weed. I looked up this saying for myself. I wanted to know. I've looked it up in the past. Because, people say a lot of things, and I don't want to end up in a situation where I have a discussion with someone and then I bring up something like that and then I'm proved wrong. But anyway, as it relates to her statement about the human weed, black people being a human weed, I went to try to check it. Went to fact check and try to see if this is true. And this is what it says. As early as 2015, fact checkers have addressed variations of the alleged quotation attributed to Sanger saying, "Slaves, Latin, and Hebrew immigrants are human weeds," and found them to be false. That is what they say. They found the statement to be false. However, this is what they found. And to me, it is the same thing. You can decide. She wrote, "Birth control is not contraception. Indiscriminately and thoughtlessly practiced. It means the release and cultivation of the better racial elements in our society, and gradual suppression, elimination, and eventually extirpation of defective stocks. Those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization." Isn't that the same thing? It's basically the same thing. So, also a major thing that happened in the first wave was the Rosa Parks situation. So people paying attention saw the power of black people coming together. Feminists saw that and they capitalized on that. Because, again, before all of this, black women were not included in their discussion. Now to the second wave, the 1960s and 1980s. There are some major things that occurred during that time. There is an image of President Kennedy signing the Equal Pay Act into law. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. The birth control pill also came into existence. Margaret Sanger, she lived to see that took place. There was that Vietnam Tet Offensive as well. So there was a lot of things taking place. There was political riots. There were people who were against the Vietnam War, and a lot of stuff was happening during that time. So the first wave of feminism was generally propelled by middle-class, Western, cisgender white women. And then the second phase drew in women of color and women from developing nations, seeking sisterhood and solidarity, seeking numbers, and claiming women's struggle is class struggle. Before that, They did not want to hold hands with you. But as soon as they come to you and say, hey, women's struggle is a class struggle, then you drop your men, you drop the struggles that you had to deal with as a group, and decide to join hands with these white women who really always used you to their advantage. And because of you, they had access to every capacity, every aspect of your life, of your culture, and so forth. And these white women who claim to have some war with their men convince you that you have war with your men as well, and you got up and run with it. And so it amazed me today when I hear some black women go after white women, say all type of stuff about white women, but in actuality, those of you who can consider yourself to be feminists really should be worshiping these white women. They are the ones who put you onto it, right? So you need to be praising them and praying to them every morning and stuff like that. So feminists spoke of women as a social class and coined phrases such as personal is political and the identity politics and so forth. So, and that is another amazing thing. People like to try to discourage the talks of a group because of the race, right? Let's say African or black people, but somehow when it comes to feminine, woman, men, that is supported. And I feel a lot of the reason for that is because the men who really control these women, who are leading these movements, they are able to have access to everyone, every people. It's almost like a form of globalization by having all the women on board, having them feel like there's this sense of sisterhood and solidarity. These women don't realize that you are giving access to your community, and it could be a security issue as well. All right, it could be a security issue. So when you get these women to turn their back against their men, they're not going to realize until it's too late sometimes. After Margaret Sanger died in 1966, President Kennedy made women's rights a key issue of the new frontier. So here we go now, the head of the country now taking on the woman's right and making it a key issue and putting women in prominent position. One of these ladies, her name is Ether Peterson. And then these lady now you have women all over the world looking to this woman, right? And she's not going to do anything outside of what Kennedy have going on, regardless of what is happening underground. Okay, so that was a very strategic way to control the movement. Just like the same thing happened with the churches as well. They had their power, and then government started controlling them, basically paying them and giving them certain incentive, and basically control what they say and what they don't say. This lady, Betty Friedan, objected to mainstream media's depiction of women and argued that narrowly reducing women to the status of homemakers limited their potential and wasted their talent. Right? So she needed a woman to get out there and do the things that men do, so forth. The idealized nuclear family that was prominently marketed at the time, she wrote, did not reflect authentic happiness and was in fact often unsatisfying and degrading for women. Friedan's book is considered one of the most important founding texts of the second wave of feminism. And in 1966, the National Organization for Women formed and proceeded to set an agenda for the feminist movement. Framed by a statement of purpose written by Friedan, the agenda began by proclaiming National Organization for Women's goal to make possible women's participation in all aspects of American life and to gain for them all rights enjoyed by men. Feminists engaged in protest and actions designed to bring awareness and change. The New York Radical Woman demonstration at the 1968 Miss America pageant at Atlantic City to bring attention to the contest and society's exploitation of women. The protesters tossed instruments of women's oppression, including high-heel shoes. These are the oppressions that they said the women were facing at the time. Having to wear high-heel shoes, using curlers, wearing girdles, wearing bras, and etc. And they were throwing bras in the fire and stuff like that to as a form of opposing oppression. But in this day and age today, don't they have OnlyFans, and you see on social media where women are freely showing the camel toe and doing all type of yoga stuff and stuff like that, so as you can see, a lot of these were older women. A lot of these were older women who probably envy these younger women too, and I'm not a fan of saying older women envy younger women, but in this case it seems like that's what it was, because if these younger women have it as a job and they want to go out there and do that, and you making it seems like man is oppressing them. Not saying it doesn't happen in some instances, but in many cases these women want to do that. That's what they choose to do. And if you try to tell them about it, if any man try to tell them about it, they will have a lot to say to these men and tell the man that, hey, you can't tell me anything. Other protests gave women a more significant voice in a male-dominated social, political, and entertainment climate. So whatever men had going on, these women at the time, they had their circles, and surely they didn't have the freedom and stuff like that. So that's why I said there was good things that came out of it. But I feel that once that freedom was granted, instead of creating a bubble or something, be creative and coming up with something that men would envy, they instead wanted to go into the world of men and do these things right here that men would do, right? And as you can see, that led to men competing with women in sports, and then all of a sudden many women start pushing back in that. They start talking about using the same bathroom, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing a lot of women start speaking up on it. But before that, all these women were quiet, moving, and they realized that, hey, this thing is going too far, and they wanted to back it up a bit, you see? So there are many elements of the feminist movement, like I say, I agree with certain things, and there are certain women that agree with certain things, and there are some that goes too far with it. But again, the real issue is that there should have been a movement, I would say, where the slave or the black woman at the time had something that is unique to them, versus moving into someone else's house and pushing that person's agenda. And the reason why I say feminism can correlate with a lot of what happened in the black community is because the black man, the black community did the same thing. Instead of maintaining or building our own house, right, and controlling what happens there, we also handed over the reins to a government, right? And we basically tell the government that, hey, we want you to hold us accountable. We want you to arrest our youths. We want you to protect our community because we can't protect it ourselves. I see that same thing happening in the Caribbean and Africa and stuff like that, where government officials are accepting all type of programs and millions of dollars from the US and UK saying, hey, we want you to help us take care of our children because we can't take care of our children. And so they come in, and then next thing you know, they push the agenda, and then the local people start pushing back. Same thing. The local people are not going to say anything. They're going to have a good time. They're going to party with all these people until they start realizing that, hey, this thing is going too far. And all of a sudden, people have all kind of things to say, and then they're going to blame the government without acknowledging or realizing that they had a say-so in this early on, right? And however, they allow things to get out of hand. Now things are out of hand and it's too late. So that is my attempt to tell people, hey, this thing is going in a similar direction, and we better speak up. We better have some control over our community. We don't need to turn the Caribbean. We don't need to turn Africa. We don't need to turn every place like the UK or like America. We need to take the good out of these places and use them in our communities. However, we need to push back on the other things that doesn't go along with our culture. For decades, Ladies' Home Journal had been a highly influential women's magazine, managed and edited almost entirely by men, which I get that. That is a rightful thing for them to push back on, right? Because it says here, men even wrote the advice columns and beauty articles. The only thing I would say is, if this was a private business, you can't really go to someone's business and bully them and tell them how they should run their business. So this is where it differs to, let's say, a movement that was created by a certain group of people, and then you have an outside source move into that culture and then dominate the culture. So there's a clear difference with that. So if the ladies' journal, if the ladies' home journal was created by men, and women start bombarding it and telling them that they have to put women in place, then I can't really align with that. I would say to the woman, hey, how about you create a magazine? How about you create a journal, and then you put women in place of that? And that is what we need to do as a people, right? And that is one thing I think, that is an area I feel we fail on intensely. That's an area I feel we fail on, because we seem to always go to people and tell them how they should run their business, and then always sell our culture to them, always sell everything to them. We give them access to everything we have. In 1970, protesters held a sit-in at the magazine's office demanding that the company hire a woman editor-in-chief, add women and non-white writers at fair pay, and expand the publication focus. Again, this is something similar to what black people deal with, and not only black people, but the movement as well. I'm talking about Rastafarianism, civil rights movements, and stuff like that, where even now, right, you would go on Facebook, you would see these things with the ice, gold, and green flag, one love, and a lot of times, most of the time, you can tell these organizations because they would use the face of Bob Marley as far as when you're dealing with Rastafarianism. They would use Bob Marley. You don't really see too much Peter Tosh. Once in a while, you would see that, right? However, they are run or administered by a non-African person. And that is because the African people who control Rastafarianism at the time opened the door and diluted the movement, right? So now when people who are of the culture start speaking up, then you have other African people attacking them. And then you have the Babylon, people of the Babylon Empire that they used to go against, even speaking in them, joining hand with other Africans to attack Africans, saying, hey, this movement does not belong to you Africans, it belongs to all of us, right? So again, it is too late for those movements, if you ask me, because they have totally sold out and opened the door to everyone because they wanted money. So it went from a movement that really was standing and fighting for something to now it's all about money. In the 1970s, they opened battered women's shelter and successfully fought for the protection from employment discrimination for pregnant women, reform of rape laws such as abolition of laws requiring a witness to corroborate a woman's report of rape, criminalization of domestic violence, and funding for schools that sought to counter sexist stereotypes of women. And these are things, like I say, the feminism movement was making grounds while the abolitionist movement basically died out. You know, they got folks to, hey, all integrated, and then it basically killed everything that black folks had going on. And then the feminist movement continued to gain momentum. In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade invalidated a number of state laws under which abortions obtained during the first 3 months of pregnancy were illegal. This made non-therapeutic abortion a legal medical procedure nationwide. Thus, the success of the second wave included a more individualistic approach to feminism, a broadening of issues beyond voting and property rights, and greater awareness of timely feminist objectives through books and television. However, there were some impactful political disappointments, as the era was not ratified by states, and the second wave feminists were not able to create lasting collisions with other social movements. For example, Patsy Mink The first Asian American woman elected to Congress, was the co-author of the Education Amendments Act of 1972, Title IX of which prohibits sex discrimination in education. Mink had been interested in fighting discrimination in education since her youth, when she opposed racial segregation in campus housing while a student of the University of Nebraska. She went to law school after being denied admission to medical school because of her gender. Like Mink, many of the women sought and won political office, many with the help of National Women's Political Caucus. In 1971, the MWPC was formed by Bella Abzug, Shirley Chisholm, and other leading feminists to encourage women's participation in political parties, elect women to office, and raise money for their campaign. So that is one thing you definitely can't deny, that women have made a lot of grounds when it comes to politics, right? Again though, it seems that it is controlled by someone, because again in politics, politicians don't simply do what they want to do, and many of these people seem to be detached from their community. And you can't take, again, right, there are a lot of good that came from it. I'm not denying that in any way, any shape, form at all, right? These are grounds that were made. Women were able to make these grounds. Again, these women, they were married, they had husbands, they had sons, and so forth, right? My thing is, why is it that African people are not able to make these kind of ground? Even though this is similar to the African plight, it is still a bit different, because this is now women are trying to prove that, look, we want to help, we can do this in your society, we can do that, and so forth. That is something we can all accomplish. But I always say, after the party is over, do you have a house to go back to? And if you're fine with not having a house, that is one thing. So for those who are not fine with having a house, if they simply want to move into someone's house and take claims, they're going to continue to run into issues, especially as more grounds are made. They'll continue to run into issues. But the thing about it is that many of these people try to dissolve themselves away. They try to breed themselves out. Many of them do not like the way they want to get mixed kids, and they keep turning the kids more and draw themselves away from being Africans as much as possible. And if that's what you want to do, by all means do that. But my whole thing is that these people never just go away. They want to dilly-dabble in every aspect, just like the oppressors. They want to have their hands in every part of society. All right. Shirley Chisholm personally took up the mantle of women's involvement in politics. She was born of immigrant parents. She earned her degree in Brooklyn College and Columbia University and began a career in her early childhood education and advocacy. In the 1950s, she joined various political action groups, worked on election campaigns, and pushed for housing economic reform. After leaving one organization over its refusal to improve women in the decision-making process, she sought to increase gender and racial diversity within the political activist organization throughout New York City. In 1968, she became the first black woman elected to Congress, refusing to take the quiet role expected of the representatives. She immediately began sponsoring bills and initiatives. She spoke out against the Vietnam War and fought for programs such as Head Start and the National School Lunch Programs, which was eventually signed into law after Chisholm led an effort to override the presidential veto. Chisholm would eventually undertake a groundbreaking presidential run in 1972 and is viewed as paving the way for other women, and especially women of color, achieving political and social prominence. The third wave of feminism was from the 1990s to 2008, and we know about the case where attorney Anita Hill accused Judge Thomas of sexually harassing her when he was her supervisor at the Department of Education and the EEOC. right? So this started a whole new movement. So the movement arose partially as a response to the perceived failures and backlash against initiatives and movements created by the second wave of feminism. Popular shows like Sex in the City, where you had lipstick, heels, and cleavages, which were previously associated with male oppression, was now empowerment, was a form of empowerment and powerful careers and having robust sex life and stuff like that. They embrace these things that the previous waves would want to get rid of, lipstick, heels, cleavages, that they once considered male oppression. These were now symbols of high-powered career, robust sex life, stuff like that. And these were now things that were praised by women. The third wave also focused on identity and blurring of boundaries. However, it did not effectively address many persistent micro-sociological issues such as sexual harassment and sexual assault. That is where the fourth wave came in and took off, right? And honestly, I did not hear much about feminism until during Trump's election. That's when I really started hearing about it. The fourth wave feminism is shaped by technology and characterized by Me Too, Time's Up movement. Considering that these hashtags were first introduced on Twitter in 2007, this movement has grown rapidly as social media activism has spread interest in and awareness of feminism. Waves of accusation against men in powerful positions, from Hollywood directors to Supreme Court justices to the President of the United States, have catalyzed feminists in a way that appears to be fundamentally different compared to the previous iterations. Success of the fourth group include proliferation of social media tags that promote inclusion and more effectively dismantle the gender and sexual binaries that have fragmented the movement. Female farm workers are demanding to have sexual harassment in the fields addressed alongside Hollywood actors. The unprecedented number of women who were elected to Congress in 2018 midterm election is another sign of success for fourth wave feminists. Specifically, we can see that women of color whose intersexual commitments also extend to environmental issues and income inequalities are represented in substantial numbers in both chambers. Feminism, for the most part, has become a weapon for liberals.